Hello everyone, welcome to the session on Greek religion as part of our Warwick 2020 Classical Civilization Teachers Day. What I want to talk about today is something that you're probably unfamiliar with and that your students won't be familiar with either. It's something new that has entered the field of Greek religion in the last few years, and it's a cognitive science of religion. The interesting thing about the cognitive science of religion is it's a very interesting topic that my students always find fascinating. It's one of the favourite things that they do when they study Greek religion here at Warwick. The other thing is it explains certain concepts that you'll be teaching them over the year, including anthropomorphism, the multiplicity of the Greek gods, the fact that there are lots of Zeuses with different epithets. All the gods had different epithets, so were meant to be in different places at the same time. Certain things like that. If we have a look at what you're actually studying from the key topics that OCR have given us. So if we look, for example, at the first topic, the nature of the Olympian gods that OCR have given to teach in this module, we see that they're talking about the anthropomorphism and the scope of the god's power. CSR can help us understand Greek anthropomorphism and any sort of religious anthropomorphism in a more forgiving way. We tend to look down on these Greek gods, and in a sense, this is what I found when I was teaching Greek religion. You have to have the students on your side and on the side of the Greeks. We don't want to be looking down on what the Greeks believed or thinking that they were stupid or primitive, and to understand that they were the same as us and that their ways of thinking were biologically and cognitively the same as ours really helps put us on the Greek side, and it helps your students to understand what the Greeks were thinking. It means that we don't look down on the Greeks and their beliefs, but we share it and see the same sort of ideas and conceptions and ways of thinking in ourselves, which is really helpful both in understanding Greek religion and in understanding any sort of relationship we have with religion. Especially now when most people are not religious, we tend to look down on religion as a primitive way of thinking that people outgrow. Sort of religion grows from primitive religion to advanced religion, monotheism, and then science. Philosophy and science, and then the gods disappear. CSR shows that actually religion is something that's inbuilt and that's something that we cannot get rid of. So if we can't get rid of it, we should try and work with it and see where it leads us. The other thing that I want to mention is that the critique of the gods of Homer and the anthropomorphism as voiced by Xenophanes. Here's a quote from Xenophanes, which everyone is familiar with. But if oxen, horses or lions had hands or could draw with their hands and create works like men, then horses would draw the shapes of the gods like horses and oxen like oxen, and they would make the same kinds of bodies as each one possessed in its own bodily frame. One thing when thinking about Greek anthropomorphism is that not every Greek is going to have taken this literally. There's a really nice cartoon that actually comes from a John Cleese book called Life and How to Survive It. And here's a conception of the Christian God with an angel flying towards him with a prayer and just saying, I have a prayer for Mr. Smith, from Mr. Smith of Barking. Dear old Mr. Smith, I hope he's not sick or anything. So this idea that God is this bearded man up in heaven with a nice crown, that he listens out, that he has to receive prayers before he does anything. This sort of idea of the anthropomorphic father figure. No one would take this seriously nowadays. But bear in mind that there's not just one way of believing in the gods or God. People do not, even in this century, do not have the same conception about what God is and what God is like. Some people will have this idea of a bearded God up in heaven with a crown answering prayers in this way, and he's English and he understands English and he's called God. Other people will have more rational, scientific, whatever views, more mystical views of what God is like. So equally, here we see at the bottom, we have the gods, we have the statue of God at Olympia, and then on the right we have the gods from Clash of the Titans, as imagined in 1980 with Laurence Olivier. Obviously Zeus looked like Laurence Olivier, and Athene was holding an owl the whole time. Did the Greeks believe the gods were like this, hanging around like people up on Mount Olympus? One thing you have to realise is that the Greeks themselves would have had different conceptions, how seriously they took the idea of anthropomorphic gods, whether they literally believed that the gods had human form, or whether other people believed it was a sort of a metaphor or an easy way of imagining them. The best thing to do to get across to your students is the multiplicity of beliefs. Every Greek would have believed in various different ways because there was no handed down revelation. There's nothing like Muhammad or Moses. We have no written word of God as dictated to a man. for the Greek gods. So there is no book of Revelation saying this is what the gods are like, this is what you have to do, this is how you pray, this is how you do rituals. It doesn't exist. So we have to look at, why do people believe without that, without a book telling them this is what the gods say and this is what they want, and they have told me this itself. Why did the Greeks believe in gods in the first place? And again, cognitive science of religion is something that can help us understand this. There are a few different ways of looking at belief, and what we can do is ask, why do people believe? One thing, logical evidence. Richard Dawkins wrote about this in The Blind Watchmaker. It's the idea that the thinker William Paley, in his Natural Theology in 1802, gave this idea that a man crossing a heath can find a pocket watch, and if he finds a pocket watch, he doesn't think it spontaneously appeared there, or it's sort of naturally evolved to be there. It's obviously someone designed it. And the same thing can go for the universe. Looking at the universe and how it all holds together, the fact that air is see-through, things like that. Obviously someone has designed it. This is the argument from design. But in Greece, in ancient Greece, there was no strong idea of a creator god in that sort of thing. There was no idea of an argument for design, for the belief in deities. And in fact, there wasn't really any idea that you had to prove that gods existed, at least, not early on. So in a completely different way from what Paley was doing and trying to convince people who didn't believe in God that there must be a God, there wasn't this sort of argument from design just didn't exist in ancient Greece. People weren't in the business of going around trying to prove the gods to each other. It was just sort of taken for granted. One of the things that really helps with this is the idea of empiricism. Empiricism is the knowledge based on the senses. Okay, and Parker, in his Greek religion, calls this the most potent of all evidences. And this is the idea that piety works and impiety costs. And if you were an ancient Greek and you went to Olympia or Delphi or any of the big sanctuaries, and you'd see votive offerings set up by people whose prayers had been answered, people who'd been saved from storms. Go to Epidaurus, you find the votives set up by people who'd been healed by Asclepius. These sort of things give evidence to people that it's real. These people believe these things. These people left these gifts because their prayers had been answered. Okay, we've got an example from Xenophon in his Symposium, where Hermogenes says of his belief, "And when I pay heed to the gods, I never regret it. Wherever the times I disregard them, I've been punished." So it's sort of the idea of piety is rewarded, impiety is punished, and the evidence of votives and dedications play into this. Other arguments for belief are just indoctrination and habit. You're born a Christian, so you become a Christian. You're born a believer in the Greek gods, so you become a believer in the Greek gods. And in the same way that water forms a channel running downhill just through repetition and repetition, so your belief gets ingrained through repetition. But instead, there's a strong proposition for religious belief, and this is that rituals actually give a sense of contact with the divine and give a sense of meaning. And this is linked to the idea of religion as a natural and compelling phenomenon. And this is what I'm going to be talking about now. Religion as a natural phenomenon is something that lies at the heart of cognitive science of religion. Some of my talk today I'm basing on the introductory chapter of Understanding Greek Religion by Jennifer Larson. It's an excellent introduction and one of the few books actually linking Greek religion with the cognitive science of religion. There will be more, I'm sure, going forwards, but this is an excellent beginning, and what it does excellently is to take the concepts and then link them to specific examples like anthropomorphism, like certain rituals of purity and miasma and that sort of thing. If you want to sum up the cognitive science of religion, there are four main points. One, we are not blank slates. Contra Burrus Skinner, the behaviourist. Here's Skinner with one of his pigeons. Skinner basically thought that we were all pigeons tapping on the side of boxes to get bits of grain. But we've found out since then, obviously, that we're not blank slates. We have instincts. We have various commonalities as humans in our behaviours, beliefs and cognition. In the animal world, this was sort of proved by Konrad Lorenz, this is him on the bottom, who spent most of his life being followed by geese, who imprinted on him. The first thing they saw they thought was their mother, so he spent trying to find a picture of Konrad Lorenz when he isn't being followed by a goose is a very difficult proposition. Okay, second, our mental architecture creates a susceptibility to representations of superhuman agents, tendency to find them memorable, compelling and plausible. This is really all about storytelling, the fact that things that are bigger than life that are interesting, we find memorable, and we want to think about them. I'll be talking about that in a bit. 3, the same cognitive mechanisms underlie all religious experience. This idea of primitive religion being somehow basic, moving on to something more intellectual with monotheism, and then finally philosophy and science, is rejected by cognitive science of religion. Religion is religion is religion, according to the CSR. Religious thinking, it would seem, is natural. Okay, returning again to the outline for the module. One of the things you have to teach your students is the different roles, contexts and functions of the Olympians as reflected in their common epithets, but also the extent to which they were thought of as separate, distinct entities, as in whether Zeus Agoraeus, Zeus Fratrius, Zeus Philios, Zeus Hercaeus, how much were they thought of as separate, distinct entities? How much were they thought of just as different parts of Zeus, parts of the same god, or separate? Were they treated separately? Did the Greeks believe that certain gods lived in one place and not another? Did Apollo live on Olympus or in Delphi? These sort of things, cognitive science, can help us understand, not in the sense of explaining away or completely getting to the bottom of this, but in a sense forgiving the Greeks for thinking two different things at once. And that's because we all think two different things at once. CSR talks about two different ways of cognition: intuitive cognition and reflective cognition. The intuitive is the natural, the sort of thinking that is fast, that you don't have to really think about. Reflective cognition is different. This is based on logic, reflection, experience. If you think, a really good example from science is the sun setting. Intuitively, we see the sun setting. We know that the sun sets. Reflectively, as scientists, we know that the sun doesn't set, the sun stays where it is, the Earth orbits the sun, and the Earth spins on its axis. So, and again, there are other examples. If you're hungry, you eat. This is intuitive. Don't eat 12 Mars bars. Okay, that's reflective, based on experience. And again, same with religion. Okay, gods, at a very basic level, I pray to God because he's going to help me. I pray to the Greek gods because they help me. They can hear me, they understand me, they speak English or Greek. Okay. At a more reflective level, you realise that that can't quite be true. God isn't English. God isn't French. He can understand. He can understand whatever language. He isn't a human being, but still we relate to him as if he's a human being. For the Greeks, Zeus Chthonios had an altar at Olympia. So Zeus Chthonios was based at in Olympia. But then equally, we know from Homer, from mythology, Zeus lives on Mount Olympus. The thing about the Greeks is that they could hold, because they were humans, because they had both intuitive cognition and reflective cognition, they could hold both of these things in their minds at the same time. It's okay to think that Zeus Chthonios lives in Olympia. It's also good to think that Zeus Olympius and Zeus Mylikios and Zeus Chthonius are different elements of Zeus, so different in fact that you have to sacrifice to them in different ways, at different times, in different places. But equally, on reflection, the Greeks would have known that Zeus Olympios and Zeus Mylikios were both Zeus. They're both sort of ways of seeing the same, they're both different aspects of the same god. But when it came to actual physical religion, the idea that you were in a shrine of a certain epithet of Zeus, you treated him as if he was there in person, as if he was a human. This projection of humanity onto the gods is central to the ideas of cognitive science of religion. Okay, so looking at the highlighter bits here, there are two things that stand out. First is I pray to God as if he is a listening human. So we've got anthropomorphism. Then we come on to the fact that the gods had epithets. The gods could be split up into different Zeuses, for example. I want to look at each of these in turn. I want to look at, firstly, anthropomorphism, that projection of humanity onto the gods, and then I'll look at the ideas of Zeus being in two different places, the gods being in two different places at once, and the range of different epithets. When we think about anthropomorphism, what we're really talking about is theory of mind. Theory of mind is an idea that centres on the importance of human evolution and the development of the human mind as being able to guess what someone else is thinking. It's due to being highly sociable creatures. As we developed to live in groups, to live in extended families, then it was very important for us to understand what others were thinking. okay, and to assume that they were thinking the same sort of things as us. We assume that someone who looks a bit like us, someone with a face, has the same thought processes as us. It allows us to project our own thoughts onto them, to gauge their understanding of events. It became important in our development to see other people as having the same thought processes as ourselves, to assume that other beings had intentions and to guess what they were. This is what survival and living in groups is based on. And part of this is the innate mechanism of recognition of faces. Whenever you see a face, you tend to project humanity on it. Okay, this is sort of at the most basic level. My students always love this little bit. Here we've got some examples of theory of mind. Up in the corner there, we've got Alexander the Great. We've got some very sad taps down there at the bottom left. And then we've got the scared burrito there on the right. You cannot help not only projecting the idea that this is a thinking, sentient burrito, but also to project fear or unhappiness at being eaten or at the prospect of being eaten. You're not just projecting humanity, you're projecting a living, moving, thinking being. Okay, here's my favourite. This is the dying bollard, the the humanity. So again, you cannot help it. You cannot help but project human emotions and feelings and thoughts onto here, something that only has a mirror suggestion of a face, just the round circle of a head. Theory of mind explains why it's instinctive and correct to imagine other humans have minds like ours, with intentions, aims and goals. Okay, just as we were projecting humanity onto the bollard, the object in question does not even need really a recognisable face, just a suggestion of sort of humanity. And one step beyond projecting emotion onto a bollard is that you then start seeing emotion and human thought in external processes. Things like exceptional events, floods, the weather, anything you can't control, you just naturally project human thoughts, human feelings, human meaning onto it. And this is a root of anthropomorphism, the projection of human emotions and human thoughts onto external processes. And you find in ancient Greek religion that the Greeks personified a certain weather phenomenon. You know, Zeus, you know, when it rained, they said Zeus is raining. Iris was a rainbow. Inanimate things, rivers, trees, things became humanized, became anthropomorphic deities. And in a sense, the Greeks were just being honest. By imagining them as humans, they were just taking CSR to that next logical step. And we know that in ancient Greek religion, the Greeks personified various abstractions with the muses or a patho, persuasion, things like this, things that we don't see as in any way human, became for them anthropomorphic, humanized, and it was a way of being able to relate to these powers. In a way, the Greeks were being a bit more honest than we are nowadays in just admitting that the way that we react to the world, the way we interact with it, is to project our own humanity, our own thinking, our own sense of meaning onto things that perhaps do not have that internal human form, human way of thinking. The key thing is, once you've humanized something external to you, once you've personified a god, something that's bigger than you and something that you find therefore meaningful, is that it becomes memorable. It becomes memorable and meaningful, and because it's humanized, you can relate to it. You relate to it as if it's a human, and therefore once you relate to something as if it's a human, you build up a relationship. Once that relationship is there, it's very difficult to break down. And we'll see in a bit about how this ability to form a relationship with the Greek gods was very important. To treat them like humans was to have this reciprocal relationship, even if it was a reciprocal relationship of someone to a very social senior, to someone of higher social standing, like a group leader, in which you couldn't expect the same things back, but you were on some sort of, you were able to form some sort of relationship in which hopefully you got handed down something of benefit for all the things that you gave them. Now, another thing about CSR is that it explains something about the memorability, about why these ideas stick around. Why did the Greeks, once they came up with the idea of gods, why did these ideas stick around? And in CSR, there's this thing called the MCI, minimally counterintuitive concept. and it's very prevalent in religious thought. Basically, if you want to be very simple, it's a fact that slightly odd things, things that are a bit slightly maybe supernormal, and odd combinations of things are very, very memorable. And once they're in your mind, it's very hard to shake them. Okay. So, for example, with the gods, someone controlling the weather, a human-like power out in the world, controlling things, who is obviously invisible, and slightly above humanity. Visible human-like power is an excellent and very memorable MCI. And when humans become capable of thinking in this way, and they cross category boundaries, sort of such as human and animal, for example, then we have our first evidence of creative thinking. We've got here the lion from the Stadel cave in Germany, in Baden-Württemberg in Germany. And again, we see here the first idea of concepts being joined together, human and animal, and it becomes this godlike figure, this something supernormal, more than natural. This god, this lion man. The thing about the Greek gods is they're memorable. Memorability and being interesting is the most important feature of an MCI concept. But if it's too complex, it won't be remembered. And if it's too boring, it also won't be remembered. A horse that paints is interesting. An invisible horse who paints, who can fly and speaks Russian, is too complex to be memorable. A man who can become a wolf is interesting. A man who can become a pencil is not interesting. Sorry, Colin. An invisible wolf is more memorable than an invisible pencil. Certain categories that we are used to dealing with are more memorable than others. Okay, men and humans and animals. Animals are just very memorable. And one clip I showed my class that they found interesting and that really demonstrates the MCI really well is from Big. A robot that turns into a dinosaur or an insect or something is just innately interesting. A robot that turns into a building is not interesting. It's the same thing with the Greek gods. Greek gods who are human but slightly more powerful, who have interesting things going on. Horses who can fly, these sorts of things. As soon as that idea is put to you, they become memorable. And as soon as something is memorable, it becomes meaningful. And this is part of the reason why these ideas stuck around and were so difficult for people to get rid of, because they were fun and the stories you could tell about them were fun. Here's something, I've got a zoological background, so I always use these zoological things. Here's a work of Nico Tinbergen, and Nico Tinbergen again is showing us the fact that for all animals, not just humans, for all animals, supernormal things that are different, bigger than normal perhaps, are just innately interesting. So here you've got an oyster catcher, and there's its normal egg down at the bottom. It's ignored that. It even ignores the medium-sized egg, and it's trying to sit on this massive rugby ball-sized egg. Same for them, same for us, same for the ancient Greeks. They liked the fact that the world was full of these supernormal human types. Returning to the epithets, Zeus Agorus, Zeus of the marketplace, Zeus Fratrios, Zeus Philios, Zeus Herchaos, him of the boundaries. To what extent were these sort of as separate, distinct entities? And again, we have to return to what I said earlier, that list of intuitive and reflective cognition. Okay, intuitively, because you react to external things, because you project meaning and humanity onto external processes, then every time that you're in a certain situation, you're reacting to it as if that God was there, as if Zeus Chthonios lived at Olympia, while at the same time there was still a Zeus on Mount Olympus. Okay, when you're there in the present, dealing in a active religious way, in a ceremony, for example, and you have to remember that all of Greek religion was basically about the ritual, about sacrifice, about that sort of human to superhuman contact, that relationship. Okay, so when you're making your sacrifices, when you're leaving your votives, when you're praying, it's that one-to-one, that personal relationship which you can have with an anthropomorphic deity. That was what was important. So in the actual rituals and working everyday nature of Greek religion, that local relationship with the different gods, different epithets in their different roles, took precedence and was just completely natural. And then if at the end, in the evening, over a cup of wine, they sat back and thought, oh, I wonder whether it's the same Zeus as the one who lives on Olympus. You know, maybe when they were reflecting, they'd probably think, oh, well, okay, basically they're probably all the same. They're all parts of the same god. But when they were actually doing the ritual, it really was all about that sort of in-the-moment relationship with a deity who was there as if a human. So when you look at Olympia, for example, there's a really good book. If you look at Pausanias's description, he describes how the people of Elis sacrifice at Olympia and which order they do it and which altars they go to first. So there's an Olympian Zeus, a Zeus of the people, a Zeus Katabatos, Descender, the lightning, Areos, warlike Zeus, Chaos, the courtyard, Keraunos of the thunderbolt, Chthonios of the earth. And each of these are treated as if they're separate deities. Each of them are given their own sacrifice in a certain order, in a different place. So each of these different epithets has his own altar. Okay, you cannot sacrifice to Zeus Keraunos on the altar of Zeus Olympios, for example. And there's a really good example in the sacrificial calendar of Urkia. This is one of the demes of Attica. There's a lovely inscription. You can find it on Attic Inscriptions online. I'd really recommend getting your students to go on there and having a look, because you've got basically a list of all the deities, of all the sacrifices, when they were sacrificed, and there's numerous heroes, numerous gods and goddesses. And here, for example, I've looked at Zeus, line 40. They talk about making a sacrifice to Zeus Mylikios at Agrai, and he's been given a sheep. Okay. Then on the third gamma, line 15, Zeus Polyaios of the city, on the Acropolis itself, and again, he's been given a sheep. Line 20, Zeus Epopeites on the hill is given the holocaust of a piglet. Okay, the piglet is burned completely because of the chthonic nature of this sort of sacrifice, piglet and holocaust. Then potentially this is a more chthonic underworld Zeus. Then we go on to Zeus Teleos, perfect or married Zeus. And for a married man, then he's being dedicated to in his wife's sanctuary, and again, a sheep. Then on the fifth, we've got Zeus Horios. He's given a piglet. Again, this is more sort of a chthonic thing. And there's line 60, Zeus Epakleos on Mount Hymetos, and he's given a lamb. So we'll see, not only are each of these Zeuses treated as different gods in a sense, they're sacrificed at different times, in different places, and given different things according to their nature. And again, one thing that CSR can teach us about that is that for each of these gods, there is this personal relationship because of this theory of mind and projecting humanity and building up a relationship with a god who is believed to be there, accepting this and pleased to accept this in one single place. Okay, in a reflective way, when you step back, then it's okay to believe that they're all Zeus. And then in a sense, if we want to put it together, here's a Manticlos Apollo from about 700 to 675 BC, found in Thebes, up on the hill for Apollo Ismenios. And we've got the inscription, Manticlos dedicated me from his tithe to the far shooter of the silver bow. You, Phoebus, give something pleasing in return. Okay, and we can separate this up into two different things. Implicit cognition. Apollo could read Greek. He knew about the gift. He knew you'd given it to him. He appreciated it in a human type way. And he'd be pleased enough to give something pleasing back in return. On a more reflective note, Apollo was an archer god. This isn't something instinctive, this is something you've learnt from Homer perhaps. And again, he's been given far shooter of the silver bow. This is a Homeric epithet. This is something that we've borrowed from culture, from poetry, and is then being projected onto our own personal vision of Apollo as he's seen at the Ismenion in Thebes. Also, another reflective thing, when people get good things, this is from his tithe, when people get good things, they need to share them with the gods in order to receive the favour back again. So again, it's a really good example to look at the implicit and the reflective modes of cognition in this one votive. I think for myself, teaching students with lots of different beliefs and backgrounds, it's good to get them all on the same page and to realise that we're all humans. This is a good thing about cognitive science of religion. It brings Greek religion away from the fantastical and the stupid, and for us to, we look down on it sometimes as how could they believe that? How could the Greeks have believed these ridiculous things? but to be able to understand why they believe these things and the processes that they had and that we ourselves have in our cognition helps us bring us closer to the Greeks and to sort of forgive them and be a bit more on their side. Equally, I think it helps to bring certain concepts together which make them memorable for your students. So, you know, the fact of epithets, the fact that there are different gods worshipped in different ways in different places, but they're all the same God. How can they believe this sort of thing? The fact that Greek religion is a religion as practiced, and that relationship, that one-to-one relationship with the gods, was very important. And perhaps when you look at anthropomorphism, don't look at it as how could the Greeks believe this rubbish. Think of it more of this is the Greeks being completely honest that this is what they wanted, a human relationship with their gods, or an almost human relationship with their gods. So you might have things that you can take to your students from here. Otherwise, it might just been an interesting diversion on dying bollards. Anyway, if you've got any questions, then do bring them along to the live Q&A on Wednesday, the 11th of November. Otherwise, thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed this and enjoy showing dying bollards to your students. Take care.